when the railways came to Guildford. The railways came to Guildford in May 1845 after a 6-mile length of single track was joined to the South Western's main line at Woking. Within 2 years, the line had been doubled, and in the meantime, another line came into Guildford from Red Hill, and a further line was being built to join with Farnham and Alton. The line was also extended to Godalming after a delay when one of the tunnels collapsed. In 1849, a further branch line to Farnham was opened at Ash Junction, and also through running of trains commenced between Red Hill, Guildford and Reading. The line from Ash Junction to Farnham was notable for the part it played in turning Aldershot into the country's most important army camp. For the camp's construction, all materials were unloaded at Tongham and conveyed there by horses and wagons. The stations from Guildford to Farnham by Ash Junction were Wombre, Ash Green and Tongham. At a much later date, we can see U-Class number 1621 with a freight from Guildford passing through Ash Junction towards Ash Green and Tongham. It joined the newly formed Aldershot line at Farnham Junction, the signal box being perched high on the embankment. A further view of the line at Farnham Junction shows the line branching off. Note the camouflage paint on the electrical substation. Other lines were also constructed between Aldershot Junction and Farnham Junction. In 1859, Godalming ceased to be the end of the short branch line when the Portsmouth Direct line was completed. The next line to enter this fast-growing Surrey hamlet came in from Horsham. This was a 15.5-minute single-track branch line with a passing loop at Baynards, with other passing loops at stations added later. The line ran from Stammerham Junction, where it joined the Portsmouth Direct line just south of Guildford at Peasmarsh Junction. The Horsham line was opened in 1865, and this photograph is believed to be the opening ceremony at Guildford. Dignitaries are waiting for the train to arrive. The Surrey militia, in their grey uniforms, were also in attendance. We believe this drawing of a locomotive built by John Craven at Brighton would have been the type of locomotive used to haul the train. Here are some locomotives that were used later. E1 and D1 class, used for passenger and goods traffic. These locomotives bore the names of the stations over the line: Guildford, Wonersh, Bramley and Cranley. By the mid-1860s, the station was developing into an important junction and was appropriately named Guildford Junction. A twin-gabled train shed spanned the centre of 5 platforms, and a covered footbridge was erected with a 2-road engine shed. This was built on the northern side of the station with a turntable at the southern end. This photograph of Guildford Station is looking north towards London circa 1870. The following photograph is a view of Guildford Station looking south, and you can make out the brick arched bridge, which is still in place today and forms part of the Farnham Road, the rest of it today being of metal construction. You can also see on the right of the photograph where the engine shed was situated. The last new route to be constructed to Guildford in 1885 was the London and South Western Railway's new Guildford line. It's still called the new line even today. This shows the new Guildford line being constructed around London Road Station, looking back towards Guildford, the embankment being in the Nightingale Road area. A brick viaduct had to be built to cross the River Wey between Guildford and London Road Station, adjacent to Walnut Tree Close. In the foreground being a link to the past of river transport and a barge being launched from Dapdune Wharf. The arrival of the railways brought the biggest change to Guildford. It gave the middle classes an opportunity to reside in the rural environs of Guildford and commute to London by train, although it probably took a little bit longer than the 40 minutes that it does today. In 1895, Dennis Brothers set up a firm to make bicycles and then went on to build buses and fire appliances. This shows their first factory premises, which is now known as the Rodborough Buildings. But they soon outgrew this, of course, and moved their premises to Woodbridge. As Dennis Brothers developed, they needed workers. You could see how Guildford was developing. The image here with an electric train running past in front is of the iconic Dennis Brothers building, which had a big factory complex. My father at one point worked at Dennis Brothers, and I can remember going to one of the Christmas parties laid on for the workers' children. I remember there being a ride that ran on rails, which travelled from one end of the hall to the other, over at least 2 humps, and was drawn by a winch attachment at either end. It proved to be an instant attraction, as this photograph shows. Dennis's also had a railway siding, and the factory was accessed via the Reading line, which curved round the side of the factory up the 1 in 100 incline, where the Surrey University complex is today. A Churchill tank is being loaded onto a wagon, this being taken during the Second World War. Note again the camouflage roof of the factory. And here again we can see an assortment of army personnel carriers on a loaded train being shunted into Guildford Down Yard. There was also a printing works at Walnut Tree Close called Billing and Sons, and of course there was also a brewery. Brewing beer was an important industry in Guildford, even before the railways came, but once the railways were established, the Friary Brewery just grew and grew, and the first premises opened in 1865, the same year as the railway line came in from Horsham. This became a huge employer of people of Guildford and surrounding areas. Guildford Motive Power Depot. There were 60 locomotives allocated to the depot, and in 1896 it was decided to make some alterations, creating 7 straight roads, each capable of housing 3 tender locomotives. At Guildford Station, the number of platforms was increased to 7, and a subway was built, and each platform was provided with a canopy. However, in 1916, in order to provide sufficient space for a new engine shed, the chalk pit, situated on the Farnham Road Bridge, was enlarged to accommodate a semi-roundhouse building with 13 roads radiating with a 50-foot turntable. Owing to the restricted space, the site of the coaling stage and ash pits had to be built opposite the station. This meant the prevailing southwest winds blew smoke, ash and grit towards the station, much to the annoyance of passengers waiting for their trains. The Motive Power Depot at Guildford continued to grow in importance after the grouping in 1923, as the trains from Guildford to Havant, Horsham and Redhill remained steam-hauled. In 1925, the shed boasted a staff of 465 men, of whom 328 were drivers and firemen. Working as a fireman in the 1960s, I find it hard to believe how many men were employed at this location. Admittedly, they wouldn't have all been there at one time, as they would have been working shifts. Even so, what camaraderie there must have been. The railway industry at Guildford, the men working at the loco shed, the station staff and track maintenance staff, The railway must have been the largest employer of people, certainly until Dennis's grew and grew a bit later during the Second World War, employing more than 3,000 staff building tanks, army lorries and tracked personnel carriers. We had a seniority sheet in a glass case at Guildford Depot, and here are names of drivers that entered service there just before, during and just after the First World War. I had the honour of working alongside most of these men, and what characters they were. The semi-roundhouse shed required a small locomotive as the shed pilot, and over the years several locomotives took their turn in performing this task. The first was E-Class Manning Wardle 040 ST number 407. Other locomotives followed. Hawthorne Leslie 040 ST number 3458, named Ironside. The next locomotive to follow was Adams 040T number 30086. Another Adams class followed, number 30089. This was between 1959 and 1963. Finally, Vulcan Iron Works USA class 060T number 30064. And then finally, another Vulcan Iron Works USA class 060T number 30072 from 1965 to 1967. The last three locomotives were affectionately called Little Jim. Here are some photographs of the railway uniforms worn around that period. And here we've got a lovely picture of Guildford Station circa 1909. The ash pit there shown in the foreground was either used for oiling the inside motion of locomotives or raking out ash from the ash pan before they recommenced their journey. Here we have the entrance to Guildford Station, circa 1910, with some nice trees and a gas lamp, and to the right of the photograph are a selection of motor carriages lined up to meet passengers. Also a glass-covered canopy, so those who travelled in style wouldn't get wet in inclement weather. A nice picture postcard of Guildford, London South Western Railway Station, circa 1910, viewing north depicting Platform 2, or the Down Cobham line as it was known. Guildford in the 1920s, and here we have a wonderful view of double-framed Bayer Goods number 288A at a home depot, Guildford, in September 1921. This venerable-looking loco was built by Bayer Peacock for the London South Western Railway in May 1873 and would be withdrawn in April 1923. London South Western Railway T1 class number 18 stands on shed at Guildford, also in September 1921. She entered service in 1895 and was withdrawn in 1935. Viewed from Farnham Road Bridge and holding centre stage in this panoramic view of Guildford Shed, the turntable and Guildford South signal box is LSWR Adams A12 Jubilee class number 533, depicted here in April 1921. Here we have a sparkling William Adams X2 class number 594, with engine crew and cleaners showing off their handiwork at Guildford Depot. Built in 1892, she was withdrawn from service in May 1931. Push-pull services were in operation over the Guildford Horsham line. Here at Guildford, we see D1 class number 265 at the rear of the train, and London, Brighton and South Coast Railway balloon stock number 650 driving end. The driver would operate the regulator via an air connection, and the locomotive and train would be vacuum brake fitted. The fireman would remain on the locomotive at the rear. A bell code system between the driver and fireman would also be used for communication. Electrification of the London South Western Railway refers to the installation of electric traction on the London and South Western Railway surface network and its successor, the western section of the Southern Railway. The LSWR started a programme of electrification in response to rising costs and loss of traffic to street tramways. The first installation was to Kingston, Richmond, Hounslow, Hampton Court and Shepperton, using the third rail 660 volt DC electrical current system. The scheme was to be divided into two stages. Stage 1 was to be Waterloo to Waterloo via both the Kingston and Hounslow loops, the main line out as far as Hampton Court Junction, and thence onward to both Hampton Court and Claygate. Before 1914, it had been a definite plan to electrify the three routes to Guildford by Epsom, Claygate and Woking, this being interrupted by the outbreak of the First World War. However, on the 6th of December 1923, the Southern Railway Board approved resumption of the scheme, now including the former London, Brighton and South Coast Railway section to Dorking and the section between Claygate and Guildford. Public services on these routes commenced on the 12th of July 1925, following a formal opening ceremony on the 9th of July at both Guildford and Dorking. The first in this series of photographs shows Guildford's town crier at the entrance to Guildford station reading a proclamation of the new electric services on the 9th of July 1925. Other photographs that follow show the train arriving from Waterloo via Cobham in the newly constructed Down Bay platform at Guildford, with an excited crowd of schoolchildren and parents looking on. The final photograph, showing a huge crowd of onlookers, and note the bunting hung between the lampposts, specially placed for the opening ceremony. An unidentified Drummond K10 class stands on the old pit, waiting to be placed into Guildford Shed. Another K10 class, number E139, runs into Guildford with an up Portsmouth semi-fast service in June 1928. K-Class River number 790, River Avon, departs Guildford heading for the Chalk Tunnel in April 1927. Following the Sevenoaks disaster in August 1927, when number 800 River Cray derailed and 13 passengers in the train died, all 21 of the class were rebuilt as 260 tender locomotives the following year. Here are some interesting photographs taken from negatives that were given to me to scan by railway photographer Norman Hampshire, depicting various scenes around Guildford Station and shunting yards in the 1930s. Southern Railway horse and cart number 68 waits patiently, and the canopy advertisement says it all. The disinfectant was patented by John Jays in 1877, and the product was granted a royal warrant to the British royal family in 1896. It continues to supply the royal household to this day. A horse-drawn wagon depicting Chaplins Limited, agents to the Southern Railway, displaying an advert for Mansion Polish outside the entrance to Guildford Railway Station. A partially hidden Franks & Co. coal and coke merchant sign can be seen on the left, while someone in the background pastes another advertisement to the hoarding. The Railway Hotel can be seen on the right. The lower quadrant starter and distance signals are in the clear position for the Reading line, as an SER Stirling B1 class locomotive prepares to work a passenger service from Guildford to Reading. A lone milk churn and a very large wheeled barrow can be seen at the end of the platform, and two of the chimneys of the local brickworks can be seen in the background. A Southern Railway 10-ton wagon with a couple of interesting labels, one belonging to a brick company and a poster depicting the coronation of King George VI, This dates the photograph circa May 1937. Guildford Station's platforms were much shorter in the 1930s, and a porter waits patiently with his loaded barrow at the crossing for a push-pull train headed by an M7 drum and tank as it departs platform 5 with a train for Red Hill. Note the short road leading to the stop block next to platforms 6 and 7, probably used for a standby locomotive if necessary. Another feature of Guildford Station were the ornate cast iron stanchion pillars, which allowed rainwater to flow from the station roof through their hollow sections to the track below. A Stroudley D1 shunting out of platform 6 and 7 at Guildford. A train made up of stone hoppers can be seen in the up yard, and some form of water tank for replenishing the train toilets can be seen parked on the platform. A view of Guildford Upyard and various wagons, and the passometer footbridge linking access from Guildford Park Road to the platforms and the main entrance has recently been built, as the roof hasn't been attached yet. Guildford Upyard dock showing the cattle pens and various types of rolling stock from different railway companies. However, the roof of the passometer, the footbridge, has recently been installed, which gave added protection from the weather. Guildford's 2 gas towers can be seen in the background. Apart from the passenger train workings, the majority of the goods workings were local in nature. Pick-up goods, etc., but there was also a reasonable amount of cattle and sheep traffic, Guildford having its own cattle market nearby. Guildford was the cattle market for West Surrey, the market being in the North Street originally, and in 1896 it moved down to Woodbridge Road, and this shows its location with St Saviour's Church in the background. Cattle would have been driven off the wagons into pens and then herded over the Farnham Road Bridge and down to the market via Onslow Street or vice versa. The movement of thoroughbred horses was also commonplace when there were races at Ascot, Epsom or Sandown Park, and here we can see some horse boxes being shunted into Guildford South Box signal box sidings with M7 tank number 30246 at a later date in 1961. The photo being taken from Farnham Road Bridge. The horse boxes would also have accommodation for the groom to travel with up to 2 horses per box. Bertram Mills Circus would also visit Guildford, and everything would travel by train, leaving their winter home at Ascot. Here we can see a circus train at Virginia Water. And here we can see the elephants being ridden along Woodbridge Road to Stoke Park to appear at their Guildford event. Another newspaper cutting here of the elephants being loaded at Guildford Cattle Dock in Guildford Upyard to travel to their next venue at Portsmouth. Between 1923 and 1948, the biggest change in allocation of steam locomotives was the arrival of the Monsell classes, and by 1933 the shed boasted 25 U-class moguls, mainly for the Reading Red Hill line, and 26 M7 class 044s. Monsell designed locomotives also appeared working trains to Portsmouth before the line was electrified in 1937. Nelson, King Arthur and V-class schools. And here we can see a schools class passing Pigsmarsh Junction with a Waterloo-Portsmouth service. The Portsmouth Direct Electrification Scheme came into force in July 1937, covering lines from Hampton Court Junction to Portsmouth via Guildford, and also the lines from Woking to Alton and from Weybridge to Staines. Re-signalling work was also extensive, with colour light signals being installed between Woking and Portsmouth, with some exceptions. The rolling stock used for fast and semi-fast services was made up of Portsmouth Express 4 Res or 4 Core stock with a corridor connection between units, and the stopping services were made up of 2 car units designated 2 Bill, and these had side corridors and lavatories but no corridor connection between the coaches. When the First World War broke out, young men responded to the call and joined up with the military in their thousands. The recruitment was such a success, railway companies were robbed of key staff, such as drivers and signalmen, and it became a crisis on the network. However, the mistake was not emulated in the Second World War. People who were working in essential services were classed as being in reserved occupation and only allowed to join the services in exceptional circumstances. As a consequence, many railwaymen were mistakenly regarded as conscientious objectors and ended up being treated unfairly. There were instances of some of them being sent a white feather, which must have been deeply distressing for both them and their families. In an effort to stop the unwarranted condemnation, some railway companies minted a badge to be worn by employees which indicated they were in railway service. During the evacuation of Dunkirk, it was appreciated that once back in England, it was essential to rapidly transport the evacuated troops away from the southeast coast to reception and redistribution centres throughout the country. Transport of the troops was only part of the requirement. Many of the men had not eaten for a number of days, and official refreshment stops were set up at various points, and because of the need to keep to a tight schedule, the trains were only permitted to stop for a maximum of 15 minutes. Additional ad hoc feeding stations were established at Tunbridge, Guildford, Woking, Basingstoke, Salisbury and Red Hill. In total, the railway system transported 319,116 troops on 620 trains over the duration of Operation Dynamo, and a further 48,000 children were evacuated from southeastern and east coast towns over this period, around 22,000 from Kent alone. The movement of freight was also essential, and here again Dennis's Engineering Works was providing essential equipment for the war effort. By 1950, Guildford Shed was coded 70C, and at the same time, the roof of the semi-roundhouse was replaced using corrugated sheeting. The shed-master at the time was Mr. George Stovold. Mr. Stovold is shown here, standing proudly alongside 2 D-class locomotives. During February 1958, a railway exhibition took place at Guildford Station featuring 2 Victorian locomotives. One was London South Western Adams T3 class number 563. Built at 9 Elms, this locomotive ended service during March 1893. The other was London, Brighton and South Coast Railway Stroudley A1 class number 82 Box Hill, built in 1880. Interestingly, a Surrey Advertiser newspaper cutting of the time shows some of my old workmates cleaning the A1 class, namely Peter Hawkins, Patrick Kinsella, John Ashby and John Purvis. Both the locomotives were preserved. Number 82 Box Hill is now on static display at the National Rail Museum at York, and number 563 has been lovingly restored and working trains on the Swanage Heritage Railway. Here we have a general view from the Farnham Road Bridge in 1958, and in the foreground is Drummond 700 class number 30700 running tender first towards the coal stage. In the centre, standing in numbers 6 and 7 platform, is an up Portsmouth to Waterloo express, and making its way towards the tunnel to its eventual destination, Guildford Motive Power Depot, is Q1 class number 33019. On the 25th of January 1959, Guildford Railway Station and Godalming Goods Yard witnessed a special train to celebrate the centenary of the Portsmouth Direct route. The 7-coach train, including 2 Pullmans, ran from London Victoria via Wimbledon, Clarendon and Guildford and was initially headed by 0395 class 30567. After changing locomotives at Guildford, 700 class 30350 continued with the train to Godalming Goods Yard. The train then rejoined the main line and continued to Havant, Fareham and Gosport and returned via Havant, Guildford, Staines, Clapham Junction to London Victoria. The Guildford Godalming Goods Yard and onwards to Havant was worked by Guildford crew, driver Bill Hedgecock and fireman Arthur Brockman. They both wore period costumes of the day. By the end of 1959, Guildford Shed's allocation had reduced to 45 locomotives, incorporating 4 M7 class, 8 700 class, 16 U-class moguls, a number of Q1 class, and Shed Pilot B4 class 30089. These were augmented in early 1960 by the arrival of 3 V-class schools, number 30903 Charterhouse, 30906 Sherborne and 30909 St Paul's for use on the Reading to Red Hills services. Guildford's Cathedral was finally consecrated in May 1961. The consecration service was carried out by Bishop Rhindorp in the presence of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret and her husband Anthony Armstrong Jones. They arrived at Guildford No. 2 platform, the royal train being hauled by rebuilt Battle of Britain class No. 34089 602 Squadron. The train was then moved to No. 8 platform and another bullied Pacific was attached to the front of the train for the return journey, this being rebuilt West Country class No. 34009 Lyme Regis. I had recently started work as an engine cleaner at Guildford on the 4th of April that year, and along with another couple of cleaner boys were given the task of making sure the paintwork of 34009 was gleaming. Once the consecration ceremony was completed, members of the royal family entered Guildford Station via the Guildford Park Road entrance, so they only had to walk down the steps of No. 8 platform to rejoin their train. The royal train then departed Guildford for Waterloo Station. This is what Guildford Station used to look like in the early 1960s. This was a male commuter's mode of dress at the time: leather gloves, briefcase and bowler hat. Here's another gentleman who probably works in the city, making his journey to London on what looks like a miserable November morning. Another gentleman waiting for his train to arrive strolls along No. 8 platform. And a further commuter in a bowler hat seeks refuge in the waiting room. Here are the crew of a V-class schools locomotive as it departs Guildford for Red Hill. Bridge House can be seen in the background. All of the schools class locomotives were withdrawn from service by the end of 1962. Further photos show railway staff crossing the foot crossing from the engine shed to the station, and of shed labourer Frank Mitchell, with shovel over his shoulder, is about to start his daily routine of loading a 10-ton wagon with ash and clinker deposited from locomotive fireboxes. Finally, an atmospheric shot of 2 HAL No. 2644, about to depart No. 6 and 7 platform with the 10:53 AM stopping service to Waterloo via Woking. Another fine viewing point of Guildford Railway Station and its surrounds was from Yorkeys Bridge, which spans a railway line between Walnut Tree Close and what is now the University of Surrey. This wonderfully composed photograph of E4 class number 32468 shunting the empty coaching stock from number 3 platform shows Yorkeys Bridge in the background. London, Brighton and South Coast Railway C2X class number 32545 with a lone brake van is departing Guildford Down Yard to return to Leatherhead. John Moon and Son Limited timber merchants can be seen in the background, along with Guildford's 2 gas holders, the Friary Brewery and Guildford Castle. Viewing towards Guildford Station, V-Class Schools number 30915, Brighton, can be seen departing with an interregional service in July 1961, its next stop being Reading General Station. Viewing in the opposite direction, U-Class number 31635 is about to pass under Yorkeys Bridge with a freight from Aldershot Yard to Guildford Up Yard. Guildford North Box sidings can be seen to the right of the photograph. A further view looking north shows Ivet class number 41301 departing North Box sidings with empty coaching stock, which will form a Guildford Horsham service. Finally, viewing south again, a colour photograph of a number of types of train that were evident in 1961. Left to right in number 1 platform, the Down Bay, is an electric unit that will make the new line service to London. Next is another electric unit berthed in the middle siding, and to the right of this is the rear of an electric service from Ascot with tail lamp attached, and is heading towards the station. And then, heading towards the bridge, is a steam-hauled passenger service that has left Guildford and is bound for Reading Southern Station. And for eagle-eyed viewers, a light engine can be seen waiting at the signal of the exit road from the loco. And finally, a 350 horsepower diesel shunter locomotive is seen in the up yard. In September 1963, the Type 3 1550 horsepower Crompton diesel electric locomotives started to appear on the Margate to Wolverhampton services, and this train is shown climbing the 1 in 100 bank from Guildford towards Pink's Hill. Guildford Cathedral can be seen in the background. Some of the drivers at Guildford Depot were booked to attend training schools at Waterloo and Stewart's Lane to learn how these locomotives operated. Top link drivers were also booked to learn the diesel-electric multiple units and diesel-mechanical multiple units that were going to replace steam-hauled passenger services over non-electrified routes. This view towards the coal stage shows 3 different types of traction in operation in the early 1960s. Standing in platform 8 is 2-bill unit number 2005, which will form a Guildford Ascot service, and Type 3 1550 horsepower Crompton diesel electric locomotive number D6504 is berthed on the coal road. An unidentified U-class locomotive can be seen berthed in the back road of the coal stage. Bully Pacific locomotives were frequent visitors to Guildford Motive Power Depot in the 1960s, usually working early morning stone trains from Meldon Quarry to Woking Yard before returning to Guildford for servicing requirements. As the turntable was too small to accommodate the turning of these locomotives, Guildford crews would need to run the locomotive via the Weybridge and Addlestone Triangle before working the stone train empties back to Salisbury. These locomotives were also sent to Guildford Motive Power Depot on occasions for piston and valve examinations, as there were a number of fitters at Guildford qualified to perform these operations. Interestingly, this view of rebuilt Merchant Navy class number 35028 Clan Line, berthed in the back road at Guildford Coal Stage, and electric unit 2 HAL number 2611, standing behind in Guildford Upyard carriage siding, is that both were built at Eastleigh Works. 2611 in February 1939 and 35028 in December 1948, almost 10 years later. An unusual visitor to Guildford was Britannia class number 70020 Mercury, pausing at Guildford on the 6th of December 1964, most likely replenishing a tender with water as the fireman shovels more coal forward from the back of the tender. She was heading a Home Counties Railway Society Eastleigh and Southampton special, heading to Fareham via Havant. On the 4th of January 1965, diesel traction took over operation of the Reading to Redhill line. The 3-car diesel-electric multiple units worked an hourly interval service. They were commonly known as tadpoles, being constructed of 2 different versions of units coupled together, the slimmer coaches being used over the Tunbridge Hastings line with narrower tunnels pre-electrification of the route. Also in 1965, the Beeching report favoured the closure of the Guildford to Horsham branch line, and on the 12th of June 1965, Ivet class number 41287 worked the final booked passenger service over the route. By the end of 1965, Guildford Motive Power Depot allocation was down to 28 locomotives and comprised 9N and 9U class, 6 Q1 class, 4 Ivet class tanks, and 1 USA class number 30072. This memo from the Shedmaster, Mr. Arthur Coe, shows an instruction to Coleman to remove coal from tenders of locomotives that were going to the scrapyard. And this unique photograph shows Coleman Steve Burke abiding by the instruction and removing the coal via the crane skip that placed the coal there in the first place. It was certainly a sad time to see such magnificent workhorses being towed away to await their fate at the scrapyards. During the mid-1960s, Guildford and the Portsmouth Direct Line was utilised as a diversionary route at weekends whilst the Bournemouth Main Line was being electrified. This brought the spectacle of bullied Pacific and BR Standard Class 5 locomotives running through Guildford with prestigious trains such as the Bournemouth Belle. On the 4th of February 1967, a special charter train consisting of 2 coaches was organised by the Railway Enthusiast Club to transport their members to their annual dinner at the Star and Garter Hotel at Dorking and return. The locomotive used was USA class number 30072 and was crewed by driver Jim Luff and fireman Ian Barnett. They were also accompanied by traction inspector Tim Crowley. The writing was on the wall regarding steam traction on the southern region, and on Sunday the 9th of July 1967, Guildford Motive Power Depot closed for good. The final 4 locomotives to depart that day were rebuilt West Country class number 34018, Axminster. She was the first to leave with a stores van for Woking and then continued light engine to Salisbury Motive Power Depot. The Guildford crew were driver Dave Bunce and fireman Charlie Hampshire. 2 BR Standard Class 5MT locomotives, number 73118 and number 73155, followed, coupled together, initially running light to Salisbury and later being hauled to Barry Scrapyard to face the cutter's torch. These 2 locomotives were crewed by driver Pat Kinsella and driver Dave Elston on number 73118 and driver Bill Brain and myself on number 73155. Finally, USA class number 30072, crewed by Fratton men, left for Fratton and then Salisbury, destined for a new career on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. This wonderful view of the stores hatch at Guildford Motive Power Depot was especially poignant for me, as it brought back memories of the times that I'd visited the stores as a cleaner boy and fireman for oil, paraffin and cloths, tools for the locomotives, etc., and also the notice cases containing notices that were now no longer required. They were truly memorable days. This ends part 1 of When the Railways Came to Guildford. Part 2, covering the years from 1967 to present day, will continue soon. Thank you for watching.